Hi, guys. Welcome to the That's Where I'm At podcast. Today I have Brooke. Brooke is a trauma healing coach, rapid transformational therapist, and NLP practitioner. Brooke specializes in empowering survivors to rewrite their stories. Her personal path, a testament to overcoming indoctrination, abuse, and toxic bonds, ignites her profound insight and unshakable dedication. A sought after speaker, author, and fervent advocate against religious abuse and domestic violence, Brooke's voice resonates far beyond the confines of her coaching practice. With Brooke as your ally, embrace a voyage of transformative healing, armed with potent tools, nurturing guidance, and profound revelations. Step into an existence where authenticity thrives, drawing soul aligned relationships that foster your truest self. Welcome, Brooke. Wow, that's amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today.
Me too. Thank you so much. Because having gone through narcissistic abuse myself, it's like that whole thing of having to transform your mind and use some different methods, not just therapy for me. I've been using so many different things, because it's something that really we need, right? We really need lots of things to help us to get to the
Um,
next step, right? Tell
um,
me how Tell me how you got into this coaching that you're doing with everyone.
yeah, honestly. So my original first career was the beauty industry. So I did aesthetics I loved making women feel beautiful and good on
Yep.
the outside.
Yep.
But even when they were on my table, I was still like coaching them through life. I was still, they were pouring their heart out to me and I was still,
It's true. Like, how do
yeah.
you guys like have mesmerized us like that, right? Like,
Yeah, it was like so I was still holding space for these women, and these women would, come in and tell me all of their life troubles and recognized I was like, oh, I think I was always meant to be the healer that I am today. I think I always kind of was able to have this gift. And so when I ended up leaving my abusive relationship in 2017 and leaving the religious kind of
Mhm.
cult that I was in
Right.
2017 for my whole life, I started to shift into this healing space, into my healing journey. And I started to recognize quickly that I was meant to hold space for women that have had this
Yeah.
type of trauma.
Right.
And I started to go back to school and completely shift
Gosh.
careers and transform. And this is really how I've gotten into this work. And it really feels like my calling.
That's amazing. And it's interesting, right? When people want to know what their calling is, but it's like, what's your passion? Like, what do you already see yourself doing in everyday life, right? You're already doing, a lot of times you're already doing that thing you're passionate about. Unfortunately, life gets in the way sometimes and right, but that's the
Yeah,
great thing about having a coach and having someone to guide you through to that, right? To get
completely.
to dig down into what you really want to do. So that's interesting that with 2017 you were doing both things kind of at the same time. I mean, was that a coincidence or was that by design?
Well, in 2017, I was still an esthetician. And so then I kind of started to go through my
Yeah,
healing space. And then I found RTT, which is the therapy that I do for
yeah,
and facilitate for women today.
yeah.
And that really helped me break through because I was kind of feeling blocked in traditional therapy. I was, obviously I've been diagnosed with complex PTSD. I had extreme anxiety off and on that I was always kind of struggling with, and I was just tired, and I finally found this other modality. And when I discovered it and I was able to kind of help me break through some things that I was still feeling really stuck in, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do this for women. I have to show them that there's a faster, quicker way to get into the other
Yeah.
side, and out of the darkness. And that's really when I started to begin that process of going back to school. And so I ended up leaving my career. I think it was about 2020. So
Okay.
2021. And yeah, 2020 is like when everything else blew up, right? The whole world was
Right.
going wild and crazy. And here I
Yeah.
was. I'm like, okay, I'm going to shift out of this and start my own business. And I've been doing that ever since.
That's amazing. I actually did too. I had a lot of changes happen in 2020, and I think there were two people, right? Two different kinds of people in 2020. And I made some giant life changes in 2020. I left my career, because I wanted something else. And when you see the way the world was, right, you almost start to get, I started to get a passion for, I'm like, life's too short. We need to, I need to do something else, right?
Yeah, completely. I think
Um,
it was like I was bored.
okay,
Not that I didn't love my job, I really did love it. And I honestly, it's like now it's a side hobby. I still loved to do what I used to do and
right,
for people that I still care about.
right.
But I'm like, it is seeing that there was something bigger, there was a bigger picture.
Hmm.
And I hadn't just stepped into it yet. And then once I did, I was like, oh, now it just continues to blossom and grow even more. I mean, this year
Right.
I'm ready to hold a 5-day retreat.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
already in the works and for May. And so I'm like, there's a bigger picture here, and I'm continuing to step into that.
That's so exciting. So you talked about that you had complex PTSD. And is that different than just, quote unquote, regular PTSD? Is that different?
So, yeah, in a lot of ways, it's more of complex trauma. It's really having many, many traumatic experiences and
Okay.
kind of basically think of like just piled on top of one
Yeah.
another. And then really have kept, they kept me in survival mode. It kept me in my fight or flight
Yeah.
responses, my freeze response, my fawning response. It's where a lot of my people pleasing came in. It really kept me not being able to truly thrive. And I wasn't aware of it, because I had been traumatized since I was a young child,
Okay.
and I did not know that this was the way I was existing. I didn't know that there was something different.
Right.
And it's like once you kind of get out of there and you start to see, okay, well, this is not how you're supposed to feel. You're not
Right.
supposed to live in fear and anxiety and feel terrible all the time
Yeah.
and feel
Yeah.
like you're, and kind of just recognizing, okay, something's not right here. And that's when I started to be curious.
So tell me a little bit about your story. You don't have to get into any detail you don't want to, but tell me a little bit about your story that took you to that place where you're like, I have CPTSD.
Yeah. Well, I think it really began in childhood, like all of trauma,
Right.
right? The
Right.
traumatic experiences really
Yeah.
start from that. I lived in an environment obviously that was very dysfunctional and very toxic.
Okay.
My father was definitely narcissistic,
Mm.
and more of wanting to control, wanting the family to look perfect.
Oh, yeah.
And that was really came from living inside of this religious space where it was
Okay.
like, okay, you were shunned, shamed, punished if you didn't abide by the law.
Yeah.
And if you did, you would get, disfellowship. So you get shunned and kind of thrown out of the community.
Okay.
And then also kind of living in the same type of environment, kind of like feeling like I kind of had a bully for a dad, where it was like
Right.
he couldn't hold emotional space for me. It was very like up and down. He wasn't stable. He was angry or not angry, or sometimes you felt safe, sometimes you didn't feel safe.
Yeah.
And then just parents that couldn't hold emotional
Yeah.
space. So I think I felt a lot of neglect, abandonment. I was also, kind of recognized, later on in life that I realized why there was some pieces that I discovered later, but there was some sexual abuse in there that happened to me.
Okay.
And recognizing that from a young age, that is the reason why, obviously that deeper trauma kind of
Right.
existed. So I felt like the story was I'm not enough. Right. And then I just kind
Right.
of went
I was
into,
gonna say you probably were
yeah.
walking around in high anxiety
Mhm.
because you're trying to be perfect. And I'm sure your parents were feeling that um pressure from the church, right?
Wholeheartedly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then they were just kind of passing that on to their
Right.
children, right? And then when
Right.
we weren't perfect, it was like shame. Oh my gosh, you shamed the whole family. You were bad.
Yeah.
And 16, when I was 16 years old, I met a boy, fell
Hmm.
in love like every other 16-year-old girl,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
and he was actually in the religion as well, but we ended up having sex before marriage, and that was not, you could not do that. So I ended up getting disfellowship is what they call
Oh my
it,
gosh.
and I was shunned out of the religion and then my community for a whole year. So I was very alone, and that was a very
Yeah.
traumatic experience for a young girl that was just trying to kind of like blossom and find herself. I was like, what do I do now? Like, I'm out of this community. I'm not allowed to talk to anybody. I show up at the church and no one will look at me. It's
Oh my
like I have the
gosh.
plague. And so that kind of really changed me on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
And then when I was 18, my parent, it's a really long story, but
Okay.
I actually written a book. It's going to be coming out in 2024 about my
Oh,
memoir, but
awesome. Yeah, that's great. I know some I'm in the middle of writing a book too because I'm like
I love it.
there's so many stories to tell, but also the healing part, right? And the journey and how you came out of that. And it's like, I'm sorry, but a book is the only place I'm going to be able to do this, you know?
Well, honestly, it was even if nobody ever read it, it
Yeah,
has been one of the most
right.
healing experiences for me that I've ever had because I
Yeah.
was able to take my story and as I read it and have edited it
Yeah.
and gone through it with my editor, it's like it's still like this cathartic space where I'm still
Yes.
like kind of doing the healing. Okay, I can sit with some of these things. Like the
Yeah.
reality of the things that happened to me were terrible.
Right.
And I think for so long my body was so great at dissociating me from it that I
Oh, yeah.
didn't feel the grief of it, right? And
Right.
so it's been that process, but I think that's what it is about being able to tell your story. Um,
I have a couple of questions about that. So let's talk a second about the disassociating. What does that look like in someone's body when they're doing that?
oh yeah, I
Or
can
as
speak to
people
that
are
a lot.
walking around in life, how would they know they're doing that?
Yeah, so we all do it on some level.
Hmm.
Our brain's main job is to keep us safe.
Right.
And, a lot of the times if we're feeling uncomfortable, what are we going to do? We're going to find distractions. So we're going to throw ourselves into our phone. We're going to throw ourselves into
Yeah.
work. We're going to eat. We're going to eat away our feelings.
Right.
We're going to drink away our feelings. Okay. This is
Yes.
all a form of like dissociation. But
Yeah.
if you have like, some deeper trauma as
Okay.
myself had, and it sounds like you probably had the
Uh-huh.
same,
Sounds, yeah.
that it's like being in the room, but feeling like you're not in the room,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
feeling like you're not really there. Like a lot of people will explain it to as like, I couldn't think, or I can't really find the words, or I can't really. It's
Yeah.
because the body is in this freeze state, which is what we call like
Okay.
the possum state, like where it's like immobile, right? Like, oh my God, I
Right.
don't know what's happening. Like,
Right.
and like we can't access our
Yeah.
cognitive function. We're just in pure we don't know what to do and we can't really
Yeah.
function. So that is
Okay.
really what I feel like it's like. It's, having
Yeah.
to like, I don't know, am I really here?
Right.
I don't know what's really going on. I can't really make any decisions right now.
And I think there are people out there, I've done it in the past, working, workaholic kind of thing, shopping, whatever, just anything to not have to look directly at it. And that gets me to my other question I was when you were talking about your book. Because I know for me, it has been cathartic to write out my story with my ex and those kinds of things. But some people, it doesn't feel that way to them, right? Or it may be that sounds scary to them. Tell me a little bit about as you're writing it, what's coming up for you. Don't make it too scary.
Well, I mean, I can kind of speak to that. It is a little bit scary.
Yeah,
For me, it was.
right?
I've gone through um, so much. I guess I would say imposter syndrome. Like, why am I even writing the story? Like,
Right.
it's stupid. Like, don't even write the story. Like, forget about it. But then recognizing that, yeah, sometimes it's hard to put it on paper
Yeah,
because then it makes it okay, this is what really happened to me.
right.
And there's a part of our brain that wants to, oh, let's hide it away.
Yeah, put it in a
Like
box.
it's
Put it on.
too uncomfortable. We
Yeah,
don't want to even deal with it. And a lot of people will even say that, oh, I don't want to go to therapy. I don't even want to look at my stuff. Like I don't,
right.
right?
Yes.
Because some people are so afraid to like get into their own psyche to understand
Yeah,
themselves more deeply that they're like, I want to just completely not even think about that.
right.
And it's really not doing them a good service, right? It's actually really probably more harmful for them
Yeah,
overall. And this is the people that have the health problems. This is the people that get cancer. This is the people that
yeah,
struggle with things in life with chronic illness and whatnot because they haven't dealt with the emotions or the processing and stuff. So that's why
right.
it's hard to can sometimes put that stuff on paper because we're like, oh, wow, this really happened and this is scary and this is a lot of grief that I have to
Right.
feel. And it's not easy to feel the emotion.
It's not, but I agree with you that it's almost, it's almost like taking it out of your brain or your body and putting it down. Even in therapy, that I've talked about this on multiple episodes because I'm a big, proponent of therapy and lots of other methods as well, because to get it out of your body, right? To just even to say this situation sucked. This situation was horrible because then, especially if say if you were in abuse or something, somebody could say to you, It wasn't your fault. And sometimes, even though maybe we know it, we have to have those people on our side telling us those things, to help us process that. And I think it's really good to put it down. I was, when I was starting to write my book, I was really sad about writing some of my story with my ex. I was like, gosh, I can't believe I was that way, because it's, to see it from this, at this part of my journey, right? It's,
Yes.
you know,
Well,
it,
it makes you feel, I mean, let's be honest, it makes you feel a little shame. I know it did for
yeah,
myself.
yeah,
There was some shame that like, oh my God, why did I put up with that shit?
I
Excuse me, I
know.
hope I can cuss on this, but
Yes, you can. You sure can.
I'm like,
Enjoy.
I'm like, why did I don't, you look back and you just look at that. What I say is there's a different version of ourselves
Yeah.
in every part of our journey. And I just
Yes.
I look back on that version of me and I feel sorry for her. I
Yeah.
feel sorry. I'm like, why did she put up with that? Why was she
Right.
okay with that? Because this version would never
Of
put up
course.
with that, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's just part of the journey. It's like you kind of get to see how you kind of morphed
Yeah.
over time
Yeah.
and what you turned into. And it's like, well, this journey still isn't over. I have no idea what's coming next. And that's, I think, the excitement of it.
It is. It's so funny talking about that thing with, like, that you don't need faith for the whole staircase, just that first step, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And being a woman of faith, people always say, like, I wish God would just tell me the plan. And I always look at them like, why would you want to know that? I said, then that what God's going to go, okay, so first your mom's going to die, and then this is, and then your sister-in-law is going to die, and then you're going to get a divorce, and then you're going to become the version of the you've always wanted. And it's like, is he seriously, like, do we really want to hear the gory details? But it's only a little bit at a time, right? That gets us
Yeah.
through our journey. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you
It's
wouldn't want
hard.
to know all those details. I would have not wanted to know all the details of this life. I would have been like,
No,
I don't want to be here. Like,
I know.
too
Well,
much.
that's the
Too
thing.
much.
No, we don't need to know the whole thing. And
No.
so, do you do some unpacking with people when they're, when you're coaching and, trying to move forward with what goals they want? Do you do, I know that it's not therapy, right? And so, because I know I have a friend who does coaching as well, and she says sometimes she gets to the point where she goes, "You got to go to therapy first," because
Yeah.
they haven't dealt with it, because our past affects our future. So tell me a little bit about when you're walking somebody through some coaching.
Completely. Yeah. So I am informed. And
Oh,
so
awesome.
I
Yeah.
did do, trauma certification for coaching and,
Yes.
and RTT obviously is working with the subconscious mind and being able to
Yeah.
move through the trauma and the
Yeah.
stories that were kind of created there.
Okay.
So with those two modalities combined, honestly, it's a little bit less of coaching. It's more of like helping people recover. So I usually
Okay.
attract the women that have already been to kind of more the therapy piece
Yes.
and they're kind of feeling stuck. They're ready to like, okay, I need something else. Like I've done this.
Yeah.
Now I'm ready for more. And that's the women that I find that I'm really
Yes.
helping them not only work through the trauma, but heal their nervous system, really kind of create a foundation. So really starting from childhood and kind of moving up so that we can kind of really
Oh,
heal
that's
parts
awesome.
of them
Yeah.
and get them in connected with their inner child. And
Right.
then being able to really empower them to
Yes.
find their authentic self and
Right.
really find their purpose.
I find that when it's like that repurposing, I don't know if that's the right word. It's not
Mhm.
reimagining, reshaping your
There you
past,
go.
right?
Yeah.
It's that whole thing, changing it so that I haven't found the right.
So I have the word for you. It's
Okay,
actually
thank you.
it's my program. I call it's rewrite your life.
Okay,
So
perfect.
it's
Yes.
rewriting your life, and that's really the narrative that I like to have because I'm
Right.
like, just because you had this traumatic
Yeah.
experiences, just because it doesn't mean that you're not your trauma.
Yeah.
You get to choose, you get to change the narrative of your story. You can
Yes.
literally rewrite your
Yes.
life. And
Yeah.
that's what I speak to because that's what I did for myself. That's what I had to
Yes.
do, right? Either had to do that or I was going to be stuck in fear and anxiety for the rest of my life and I was going
Right.
to suffer.
Right.
So I had a choice. I had two paths,
Yeah.
right? I could stay in the darkness or I could come into the light and see
Yeah.
that there was a different way. There was another way.
Oh my gosh. Well, and I think that's the good part when people get so scared, right, to look at their past. And it's hard to explain that sometimes until they start doing it in a safe space that you can take it. Yes, that happened, but now let's not let it affect you the way it's always affected you. You know,
Yeah.
it's those stories, right? Those stories we tell ourselves, all those things, those horrible things we're saying about ourselves that maybe we weren't the ones who were saying it.
Yeah.
One of my
Inner
one of
critic.
my one of my friends says, she says, be careful what you're thinking about because they might not be your thoughts. You know, it might not be your voice in your head telling you you're fat or ugly or whatever it is. You know, it's so interesting to me the way our brain does that.
Yeah, well, it's really that inner critic. We
Yeah.
talk about that a lot, especially being, having complex trauma,
Yes.
that are part of our psyche will create the kind of this inner critic within us
Okay.
because we were always told these negative things. We've
Yeah.
always, felt these kind of wounds, or our parent was highly critical. So then we become critical of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
then that's why they always say you're your own worst enemy, because it's the
Yeah.
truth. It's those thoughts that continue to kind of just like repeat over and over and over again, and then they become this subconscious program. And
Right.
it's really about being able to clear that out and recognize, okay, I don't have to listen to this anymore. Like
Right.
I'm now the adult and I get to choose how I'm going to
Yes.
speak to myself. And it's really about self-love and compassion.
Well, sometimes people need permission to not have
Yes.
to think that way anymore. And, because especially when you're worrying about family. So I want to talk a little bit about family. Like, did you go back to the church? Okay, so you were shunned, at 16, or, were you able to, did you go back to the church? Did you want to? How was your family in that time?
So at that time I did. I finally was able to go back to the church about a year later. They let me back in. They said
Okay.
that I had finally been forgiven, and I had been repentful. And then once I did that, it was like I kind of my father did not want me to see the boy that I had been
Okay.
seeing. And so the long story here is that they forbid me. It was kind of like a star-crossed lovers story, right? Because
Okay.
it was
Yeah.
like dad said no way.
Sure.
They put a restraining order against him. I could
Oh
not
my
see him. There
gosh.
was, yeah, there was the law
Wow.
involved.
Wow.
There's a lot there. So very star-crossed lover story. And I
Yeah.
ended up finding him when I was 18 and eloping and running off with him.
Oh, wow.
But long story short, I didn't realize that I was recreating the same scenario.
Okay.
And that was the relationship that I stayed in for 17 years that was abusive, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But it was no different. I was something that was familiar to me, so I didn't know any different.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
We often can go back. I have looked back and I said, wow, Laura has a pattern. It's
Yes,
we have a
yes,
pattern because it's that
mhm,
it is comfortable, right? Even if it was abusive in your family, it's comfortable because that's what you know. And
yeah,
so we don't have I don't know if we realize that our brain just goes to what's, I guess, quote unquote, comfortable, even though it's chaotic, right?
yeah. Even though it's not good for us, the brain it doesn't know what's good or bad. It just knows what's familiar. How I've been surviving since then, and so I kind
Yeah.
of stayed in that dynamic for all those years and had no idea. And I broke free from both of them in 2017. So
Okay.
the cult and the relationship, and that's kind of really where it's part of my awakening journey to be
Okay.
like, okay, whoa, I can kind of see things big picture and start to be curious. Why, what's really going on here? I had been controlled my whole entire life.
Oh my gosh. And so do you have a relationship with your family?
So no, I do not.
Okay.
When you leave that cult, you get basically abandoned, right? You're
Oh,
shunned.
okay. Okay.
And so I have not actually spoken to my parents in probably about 2 years. I mean, we had a little bit of communication there for a bit, but I haven't
Okay.
seen them or talked to them in over 2 years. So I did have a lot of grief there.
Yeah.
I still, it's like grieving a family that's still alive,
Yes. Hmm.
and it's very strange.
It
But
is.
it's
Yeah.
necessary. Like, so I went through that grief. But there's days where I will wake up and I still I'll miss my mom. I'll just be like,
Right. Yeah.
oh, I wish I could see my mom, but
Right.
it's just not in the
Yeah.
cards for me. Yeah.
Right. Not right now
Yeah.
if they're in that cult and living that life, right?
Mhm.
They're choosing that. They think that's what is best. Probably that's what they're told,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So that's hard. Do you ever work with people regarding that, breaking ties with their families? Do you ever talk about that with
I
people?
I don't really talk about breaking ties with the families. I really like that up for people to make their own decision.
Right, right.
I really like to guide people to recognize, okay, what are codependent,
Yes.
dysfunctions that are might be happening in family scenarios, or
Yeah,
when maybe you are being abused by a family member and
yeah.
you don't necessarily know the difference. I like to give people knowledge so they can make their own decisions.
Hmm.
But I think that is sometimes necessary where you kind of have to emotionally disconnect from family,
Right,
even though, we always say, oh, blood's thicker than water. Like, not necessarily. There is a lot of dysfunction in families, and those are toxic environments that
right,
can be mentally harming you, whether you see it or not. You
right.
know?
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
and that's the thing is that I also have some issues with some family members, and it's hard. It is hard to grieve somebody who's still alive.
Mm.
Um, but it's for my mental health, it had to be a certain way, because I did feel it wasn't my choice, but it's my choice to continue with the boundary, and so that's
Yes.
hard. That's the
Yeah.
thing. We have that choice, right? Or
Yeah.
or whatever it looks like. You don't have to completely cut somebody off. You could have just a um, further away relationship, not as
Yes.
close, right?
There's a lot of boundaries, I think. And a lot of people are like, well, my mom needs me. She needs me. Well, if she's abusive,
Yeah,
sometimes you just have to walk away, and they may not understand and they may be hateful for it, but at
yeah,
the same time, how is it affecting you? And I think a lot of the times we have this, especially us as women, we
yes,
have this, I need to take care of everybody else
right,
and first, and we forget about ourselves, and we think it's selfish to worry about ourselves. Okay, well, if
right,
someone's hurting you,
right,
how long are you going to allow that? You wouldn't allow that with a friend. With a friend,
right,
you'd cut them off tomorrow, right? You'd be like, I'm not going to be treated like that. But with
right.
our mom or our dad, all of a sudden we're like, well, they're our mom, they're our dad. Well,
Yeah.
they can still be shitty humans.
I mean, and it's so
Yeah,
sad. It's
yeah.
true. And I know it makes it harder for people. I have people who don't agree with some things I've done regarding family, but I tried to explain. I'm like, okay, but I'm not here to abuse, So it's interesting. And I have interviewed somebody who has completely cut out their mom, and she talks about that because she does do that, talks about narcissistic parents and stuff, and it's really hard because you have to think about it's so what if it's your mom? It's constant abuse. It's not just they call, they make fun of your wardrobe or something. It's like constant abuse. And so you got to figure out where's the line for you, right?
Yeah, I think so. And everybody else is going to be different. And some people
Yeah,
just might not be able to handle that.
right.
And that's okay too. I find a space where it's like, okay, no judgment. Why judge someone else for doing what's best for
Right.
them?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Just stay out of it.
That's for sure.
Stay out of it.
So
Yeah.
when you're doing tell me about when you are rewiring and rewriting your life by accessing your subconscious life. I had written that down.
Oh, did you?
And I want to know, we must have talked about it before, and I really like that. I just thought if you want to talk a little bit about that, I would love you to share that.
Yeah. So yeah, really rewriting your life is being able to get really definitive on what are the stories that you continue to tell yourself.
Yeah,
So we think the same thoughts on a pretty repetitive basis every day. Tomorrow you will wake up and have the same repetitive cycles that you did yesterday
yeah.
because it's part of your subconscious programming.
Okay,
So if you tell yourself the same thing every day, you're going to recreate the same thing over
okay.
and over and over.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I always tell people, like, your subconscious mind is, think of it like a snow-covered hill, right? When
okay,
you go down this snow-covered hill on a sled, what happens? You make grooves in the snow, right?
okay. Yes,
And the more you go down that same groove, so the more the same story you go down, the easier it is to go down that pathway every time, right?
yeah,
And so if you're telling the story that, well, I would love to go and create this business, but I can't do it. I'm too afraid. I don't know if I can do it. Well, then you're never going to go and do it
Right.
because you told yourself that same story over and over again. And your subconscious is like, you know what, that must not be safe. You probably shouldn't go do it.
Yeah,
You're
you
not
don't do it.
capable.
Don't.
So,
Because I mean,
yeah,
in the
yeah.
brain, that's a thing. It's that same, right? That snow-covered hill. We're putting in, I'm just, because I was a speech therapist 15 years, so the whole brain thing.
Okay.
And it's true. I tell people, I'm like, okay, if you say nice things to yourself or terrible things to yourself, I go, you're still firing those neurons and you're making those
Yeah.
grooves in your brain. So you might as well pick the one that is good. Even if you don't believe it, listen, even if you don't believe it, start talking positively.
Wholeheartedly. I think as human beings, we look at the physical. So we'll
Yes.
go to the gym and we'll look at our bodies and we'll be
Yes.
constantly obsessed with what's going on and on the
Yes.
outside.
Yes.
Well, you have the most powerful thing in between your eyes,
Yes.
brain, and a lot of people don't know how the hell to use it. They're
No.
lost. They're like, I don't know how the hell to use this thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was one of those people once.
Right.
So
Of
y'all are
course.
not alone. Like I was,
Right.
one of those people that didn't know how to use it for the best of my ability to have the best life.
Right. Right.
And being able to get very clear on what the stories you are that you tell yourself. What are the
Yes.
things you're recreating in your life? The same scenarios, the same dramas. Okay,
Right.
the same, right? The same stuff.
Over and over.
Getting really
Drama
clear.
just follows me. People who say that drama
Yes,
just follows me. Yep, it does
it
because
does
you're
because you
allowing
like
it.
it because you're addicted to
Yes.
it. Yeah, you're
Yep.
addicted to the drama. Yeah, it's like just being able to get clear on that stuff, and then you have the ability to create those new snow-covered hills, those new neural pathways to
Yes.
say,
Yes.
oh, you know what? I can wake up today and say, I can create this business and I can do
Yeah.
this. And, really getting out of the fear, um,
Right.
because our brain is already negatively biased,
It
right?
is.
It's
To
always
keep
going
us
to come.
safe, right?
Yeah.
I've heard that. To keep us safe, it
Mhm.
goes to the negative, to go like, "Oh my gosh, if you go over there, you're going to die." Because our brain has that primitive, it wants to keep us safe. And
Yes.
so it's like for
For
everything.
sure. Like I'm sure anybody that's listening, and maybe even yourself, you can think about the most like negative, pessimistic person that you've ever met.
Yes.
That person is really stuck
Yes.
in that negative bias, right? Everything is negative. All things are negative. The world is
Yes.
negative. This person's, it's
Yep.
just like the whole world is doom and gloom, right? Like,
Everything. Yeah.
and that's really showing you like, okay, this is how negative you are, right?
Yeah.
And I think the best thing that I can always teach people that I meet and clients
Hmm.
is what you judge in another
Yeah.
is a reflection of what you judge in yourself.
Oh, interesting.
You
Yes.
just cannot see it because a lot of
Yes.
the times the subconscious mind hides it.
Yeah.
But if you could really start to pay attention to that, if you can
Yeah.
slow down and you can pay attention to that, you can start to see that as a reflection back to you
Wow.
of what's going on within.
Oh my gosh. That's okay. So that's eye opening. I'm going to be paying attention now to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I do talk about being a speech therapist, doing stuff with the brain. I do talk about it. I always, I like to do little visuals with the neurons when they fire, just like that they're little germy people, right? Like to, like I say, imagine a cartoon kind of thing. And when people say, oh, I'm so bad at technology or whatever, right? I said, yep. And I said, and all your neurons just fired together. And they looked at each other and they said, guys, we are bad at technology. And
That's
they locked into place. And I said, but your pathways can lock into place in a positive way. You could say, I don't know how to do that yet. Or, there's so many, out there. The power of yet is one that we used when I was in the school district. That's such a good one to, you don't know how to do it yet, and I always tell people that I'm like, why do you think every motivational speaker, every therapist, everybody says talk to yourself positively in the mirror?
Mhm.
And I was in such a low place at one point. I said to myself, I was sick of myself. That's what I was like. I literally was like, I don't understand how people walk around this world happy. Like, how do they do that? Like, how do you
Yeah.
do that? Right. And so I just taught myself to start looking at myself in the mirror and just saying it, even if I didn't believe it, you
Mm.
know, those kinds of things to start rewiring my pathways, those grooves, right? Just
Yeah,
start
and it's a
going.
process. I mean, just
It
like,
is.
I'm sure you've heard of Mel Robbins. I know she does
Yes.
like high
Yes.
five challenge, and
Yes.
everybody talks about that because that's part of that, like looking in the mirror, like just something simple like giving yourself a high five in the mirror
Yeah.
and being able to recognize that the more that you can just show this positive nature and okay, I do love myself, especially
Yes.
if you've had body issues, if you have body dysmorphia.
Yes. Yes.
I suffered from that for many years. I
Oh
still
yeah.
struggle. I'm still kind of getting out
Hmm.
of that space where I always
Yeah.
thought, I was super thin. I always thought I was fat. And it's crazy because
I
I've always been
know.
thin.
My mom was always on a diet, and so of course I grew up with that, that issue of you just didn't I didn't have a healthy body issue that way. I know, I just remember, and my poor dad would say things, I don't blame him. That's what he knew to do, I guess, to try and keep me healthy or whatever, but I think back especially when I got married, I was like, I'd like to be that fat again.
I
Right?
know,
I
right?
was
It's
so
so crazy. We look at the pictures and I'm like, why did I ever think that? It's just
I
wild.
know. It
Yeah.
is. And so we have to be careful how we're looking at ourselves and how we're talking to ourselves. Yeah, I do. I love Mel Robbins. Brene Brown has been a really
Mm,
important one for me too,
yeah.
because the biggest thing for me was vulnerability when I started really working on codependency. That's the first one I started working on. When I learned about codependency, I'm like, oh, I get it. Oh, geez.
Yeah. That was
So
like scary. I was like, oh, that was like
yeah,
right. That
yeah, I
talk
was
about
like,
scary. Oh my God.
I'm totally offended right now, but
I'm like, I am so codependent. Yeah, it was bad. It
oh,
was
it was really
bad.
bad. Yeah, but it was hard. And my son knows I tell this story, but we brought him home from college. He was on drugs and alcohol, and and that's I was like, wait, I thought I was a good mom, right? And so, but then that's when God was saying to me, yeah, okay, you need to go work on being codependent, because as moms, I think we kind of go that way anyway a little bit, right? We want to take care of our kids and save them from everything, and it's like
Yes.
when it was such an important thing like drugs and alcohol, I couldn't save him. He had to save himself, and so I had to go learn how to let him save himself. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I'm
It's
sure that must have been so hard. Yeah, because as moms, I mean, yeah, we are like mama bears, right? We want to just like protect. And I found myself doing that with my own boys, wanting to like
yeah,
try to protect them. And,
yeah,
I really was really doing them a disservice.
right.
Or,
Oh yeah, for sure.
I was like, they have to go and fail
They
because
do.
if
Oh
they
my
don't
gosh.
fail, then they're going to fail later in life and they're going to be like, oh my God, what do I do? Like, it's going to be
Yeah.
pure
Wait,
panic.
how am I failing? Mom always, that's the
Yeah.
thing. I mean, I don't want to, go down the road of shaming anybody for anything. But I think when kids, okay, so when kids can fail at the little things,
Yes.
then they're not gonna, their first failure isn't going to be going to jail or something. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
yeah, my kids were, I don't, agree with the participation trophies and all that stuff. It's fun, but sometimes like, well, sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. And
Yes.
that's the way it is.
Yes.
Sometimes you never win, and it's okay. That's not your identity. And that's what we had to learn. And I'm thankful that my kids they're all in a place where they can handle that, and life, knocks them down, and their language is such that they understand that it's not like I'm so unlucky, or you know what I mean, like that kind of thing. It's like, yeah, sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. And
Yeah.
so,
That's
I mean, of
great.
course we have consequences of our actions, but
Yes.
I
Of
don't have to
course.
save them all the time. They have told me that. They're like, I have a tendency to want to do that. Let me help you. And they're like, oh my gosh, mom,
Yes.
we
I
can
know.
do it.
I still do that with my youngest, but both my boys, they've gone through a lot in their life,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
lost their father in 2020,
Okay.
and so that was really difficult for them. So they had a
Yeah.
lot of grief, and they
Yeah.
also, I mean, we left a religion, and they kind of thought that that's what we were supposed to do, and so they kind
Yeah.
of lost their little bit of their identities, and so.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's why we do want to protect our kids, right? When they've gone kind of through some of these
Right.
harder things of life. And
Yeah.
but I think what the best thing I've ever given my gift for my kids is helping them to access more understanding of themselves
Yes.
on a deeper
Yes.
level, their
Yes.
emotional intelligence, and especially being boys, like it's
Oh,
okay to feel your emotions, like giving you
yes.
permission to do this,
Yes.
especially while they were grieving. So I
Yeah.
think that's so important.
Well, so I love what you're doing because then now you're setting, you're breaking these generational curses of things that, you're giving freedom to your family, right? And so that they're going to be these men that are healthy in their families. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
the cycle doesn't continue. And so I love that you're helping people do that. And it's amazing how we can turn our pain into purpose. It's been like such a blessing to be able to talk to people like you, because I just love what you're doing to help people, and I hope people will connect with you, because I know it's just been, I think the biggest thing is that being trauma informed, and of course you have it in your background as well, but being trauma informed, that's what I tried to explain to people who are my friends who unfortunately are going through this kind of thing as well. I try to tell them you have to find someone trauma informed. Not everyone, some people just want to talk, have you talk about it, and it's like, it's not enough, it's just not
It's not.
enough to, do you need
Mhm.
strategies? You need to understand what your brain is doing and why you're
Mhm.
feeling the way you are. Why after 14 months I still am like, it's weird, in my brain. And
Yeah,
the
you need the
things,
tools. You need the tools. I always tell everybody it's like getting a backpack full of tools.
yes,
You know how you operate,
right,
how you were existing, and why. What were the stories that made you exist the way that you are? And now you have
yeah,
these tools. So when you're triggered, when you're having a difficult day, when you're stressed, how you are able to help yourself through
okay,
and navigate these things, but also to be in touch with your emotional side, to
right,
be able to let your body just express what it needs to express and
yeah,
know that crying is part of the way your body gets back to homeostasis. It's a healing piece. It's why we
yes,
cry.
I know. And at the
So,
end, you
yeah,
know how when you're done crying, you go, I feel so much better now. And it's
yes,
true. I never
exactly.
understand when people say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to cry." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
love it. I will put on a sad movie on purpose so I can get it out of my body."
That used to be me in the past. I'd be like, oh my God, I can't cry. I used to think that crying was
Yes.
weak. Don't
Right.
show anybody your tears, be
Yeah.
strong, pretend like you're strong. And I
Right.
think so many people do that. They pretend like they're okay, but really they're not okay deep down. A lot
No.
of people are hiding.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Well, my gosh, Brooke, thank you so much for being here today. I so appreciate you.
Yeah.
And I hope that people will connect with you. We're going to put all your information in the show notes so that people can connect with you and start their healing journey, and hoping if anything resonated with them, they will contact you. So I really appreciate you. Is there anything else you want to say before we say goodbye today?
I would just say that, you know what, there is always a different way. Anybody that's out there that feels like they're
Yeah.
just like at the end of their rope, they're just really struggling, that
Yeah. Yeah.
there is another way, there is hope, and that you really can thrive. Like, just know that there's so much out there to be able to help you, and that
Yes.
you can find it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yes. You have some tools for them. That is for sure. For their backpack.
Yes,
That's
thank you.
right.
Thank you so much for letting me be on the show. It was a
Oh,
lovely conversation.
good. Thank you so much for being here. I just really appreciate it because I just am thankful for like the different things that are out there to help people, because I know so many things have helped me, and sometimes I'm just like, I want to try this and this and this, because you never know what's going to be the thing that really helps. So that's why I really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks so much for being here. And if anything resonated with you guys, would you please go to social media and of course share the episode and leave a review and tell us that you liked it. And of course, connect with Brooke. Her information will be in the show notes. Thanks again for being here, Brooke. I appreciate you. Okay, we'll talk to you guys later. Bye. Where's my stop?